Some moments in life arrive quietly, no drumroll, no warning. They slip in through a revolving door, disguised as ordinary Tuesday afternoons. This is one of those moments. Except nothing about what happened at Gate B-22 in Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was ordinary. Not even close. Atlanta, Georgia, 6:47 a.m. Marcus Ellington had not slept. Not because he couldn't, but because there hadn't been time. The past 72 hours had been a blur of conference rooms, handshakes, and the kind of high-stakes negotiation that makes your chest tight at 3 a.m. As the founder and CEO of Ellington Technologies, a $340 million cloud infrastructure company he had built from a one-bedroom apartment with a laptop and borrowed Wi-Fi, Marcus was used to pressure. He wore it the way other men wore cologne. Quietly, confidently, without making a scene. He was 43 years old, 6'1", impeccably dressed, even at this hour. A charcoal wool blazer over a crisp white shirt, dark trousers with a crease sharp enough to cut glass. His carry-on was a sleek Rimowa aluminum case, the kind that costs more than some people's monthly rent. Inside it, a signed merger agreement worth north of $80 million, his laptop, and a framed photograph of his late mother, a woman who had once told him that the only way a black man gets respect in this country is to be so undeniably excellent that the room has no choice but to sit down and listen. Marcus had listened. He had spent 20 years being excellent in rooms that weren't built for him. Boardrooms, investment meetings, industry conferences where he was often the only face that looked like his. He had learned to move through those spaces with a particular kind of grace, deliberate, unhurried, never apologetic. His presence was earned. His dignity was non-negotiable. He walked through the terminal with the measured pace of a man who had long since stopped running for anything. His boarding pass was already pulled up on his phone. First class, seat 2A. He had a layover in Chicago and a full afternoon of back-to-back calls once he landed in New York. The merger was 3 days from closing. Everything was aligned. Everything was fine. Until it wasn't. The gate area for Flight 1184 to Chicago was moderately busy. A Tuesday morning crowd of business travelers, a few families, an elderly couple sharing a blueberry muffin near the window. Marcus found a seat near the boarding zone and set his Rimowa case upright beside him. He answered 2 emails, declined a call he'd return later, and watched the tarmac with the distant focus of someone whose mind is already at the next destination. He didn't notice her at first. Most people don't notice the moment before the storm. Her name was Karen Whitfield, and she had been a flight attendant with Skyline Airways for 11 years. By all accounts from her colleagues, she was efficient, punctual, and, depending on who you asked, occasionally difficult. She had a reputation in the crew for what her supervisor would later diplomatically call selective patience. What less diplomatic people called her, behind her back, was more pointed. Karen walked through the boarding gate door into the waiting area carrying a tote bag and a coffee, moving with the distracted authority of someone who has done the same job so many times that she stopped really seeing the people in front of her. She had a checklist in her hand. She was muttering something under her breath about the catering cart. She stopped when she reached Marcus's row. Her eyes went to the Rimowa case beside him, then to him, then back to the case. What happened next took approximately 8 seconds. 8 seconds that would unravel 11 years of employment, spark a national conversation, and remind millions of people of a truth that never stopped being true. Dignity is not something you earn. It's something every human being carries with them, whether or not the world chooses to see it. Marcus Ellington was about to board a plane. Instead, he was about to make history. What happened next wasn't dramatic in the cinematic sense. There was no shouting, no crash of furniture, no crowd gasping in unison. It was something worse, something quieter and more revealing. A small, contemptuous act performed by someone who never expected to be held accountable for it. Gate B, 22, 6:51 a.m. Karen Whitfield stopped in front of Marcus Ellington's row. She looked at the aluminum Rimowa case standing upright beside his seat, the same case he had carried through a dozen airports in the last month. And without a word, without a question, without so much as making eye contact with the man sitting 12 inches away from it, she kicked it. Not a nudge. Not an accidental brush of her foot. A deliberate, sharp kick that sent the $1,400 case skidding across the polished terminal floor with a sound that cut through the ambient noise like a slap. The case spun. It hit the leg of an empty chair 4 feet away and stopped. Marcus looked up from his phone. Slowly. He had the expression of a man who was making a very deliberate choice about how to respond. The kind of choice you learn to make when you've spent a lifetime being tested on your composure in rooms where the rules weren't written for you. Karen was already turning away. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't looked at him. She was consulting her checklist as if she had simply moved a piece of furniture. "Excuse me," Marcus said. His voice was calm, measured. The voice of a man who runs a $340 million company and still remembers how to speak to anyone. Karen paused. She turned her head slightly, the way people do when they've heard something but haven't yet decided to fully acknowledge it. "That's my bag," Marcus said. A beat of silence. Karen turned slightly more, enough to glance at the case, now sitting against the other chair. Then she looked at Marcus. Her expression was not apologetic. It was not confused. It was the particular expression of someone who has been mildly inconvenienced by the existence of another person's feelings. "It was in the way," she said. 3 words. Flat. No sorry. No excuse me. No acknowledgement that what she had just done was anything other than completely reasonable. Marcus set his phone on the seat beside him. He stood up. He was a full head taller than Karen Whitfield, though he made no use of that height in any aggressive way. He simply stood, the way a man stands when he has decided that a conversation is going to be had, one way or another. "It was not in the way," he said. "It was beside my seat in my personal space, and you kicked it without asking me to move it, without speaking to me, and without any acknowledgement that you'd done it. That's not acceptable." Karen stared at him for a moment. Something flickered across her face. Not remorse, but recalculation. She looked at the case. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the other passengers who were beginning to glance up from their phones and their muffins and their window watching. "Sir," she said, and the way she said it, the particular flatness of that single syllable, carried a weight that anyone from a particular demographic in America would recognize immediately. "I need you to calm down." He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved toward her. He had done nothing except stand and speak clearly and directly. He was, by every observable measure, already calm. But she had used that word, that particular instruction, directed at that particular person, in that particular way. The elderly woman with the blueberry muffin had stopped chewing. A young man in a business suit 2 rows over had lowered his headphones. A mother with a toddler on her hip had turned to look. The quiet Tuesday morning gate had just become something else entirely. What Karen Whitfield did not know, what she had no reason to consider because she had not looked at Marcus Ellington as a person worthy of her full attention, was that the man standing in front of her was not a man who would be told to calm down and simply sit back down. She also did not know that 3 seats behind where she was standing, a 22-year-old college student named Destiny Brooks had already raised her phone. She had been recording for 45 seconds. Before we go further into what happened at Gate B22, you need to know who Marcus Ellington actually is. Because this story isn't just about an incident at an airport. It's about what it means to spend a lifetime building something extraordinary, and still have someone look at you like you don't belong. Background: Marcus Ellington's story. Marcus Ellington grew up in Decatur, Georgia, 20 minutes from the airport where all of this took place. He was the youngest of 3 children raised by a single mother, Dorothy Ellington, who worked 2 jobs, days at a hospital laundry facility, evenings at a grocery store, for most of Marcus's childhood. They were not poor, Dorothy always insisted. They were income-challenged, she said with a laugh, which was how she handled almost everything, with stubborn, dignified humor. Marcus was, by every teacher's account, exceptional. Not merely smart, exceptional. The kind of student who finished tests before anyone else and spent the remaining time sketching diagrams of computer architectures he'd read about in library books. He received a full academic scholarship to Georgia Tech at 17, where he majored in computer science and spent most of his junior year convinced he was going to change the internet. He was not wrong. After graduation, he spent 3 years at a mid-sized tech firm in Charlotte where he was the only black engineer in his department, the youngest person in most meetings, and consistently the person whose ideas got credited to someone else. A phenomenon so common it had become a kind of ambient noise in his professional life. He documented all of it, quietly, methodically, the way his mother had always told him to. Write it down, Marcus. People forget what you said, but they can't argue with what you wrote. At 28, he quit. He had $11,000 in savings, a second-hand MacBook, and an idea for a cloud infrastructure platform that would allow mid-sized companies to scale their data operations without enterprise-level costs. He built the first version of what would become Ellington Technologies in his one-bedroom apartment over 14 months of 18-hour days, surviving on coffee, determination, and the occasional meal his neighbor Ms. Patterson left outside his door because she was worried he'd forgotten to eat. The first funding round was brutal. He pitched 41 investors. 37 said no. 2 ghosted him. 1 told him, with genuine kindness, that the market wasn't ready. 1, a quietly legendary angel investor named Gloria Chun, wrote him a check for $500,000 and told him she'd never seen a cleaner pitch deck in her life. That was 15 years ago. Today, Ellington Technologies serves over 4,000 corporate clients across 38 countries. The company employs 2,200 people, nearly 60% of whom are from underrepresented backgrounds. A hiring philosophy Marcus built into the company's DNA from day one. He sits on the boards of 3 nonprofits focused on STEM education for Black and Latino youth. He has been named to Fortune's 40 Under 40 list twice. He speaks at 3 or 4 major conferences a year, usually for free, always on the same general theme: what it actually takes to build something real when the system wasn't designed with you in mind. He drives a modest car. He lives in the same neighborhood in Atlanta where he grew up. He still has his mother's framed handwriting on his office wall. A single sentence she wrote him when he started his company: build something so good they have to respect it. Dorothy Ellington passed away 4 years ago, in the same hospital where she used to do laundry for other patients. Marcus was with her. He held her hand and told her what the company had become. She smiled, he would later say in a rare public interview, the way she always smiled when she already knew something good was going to happen. He was wearing her watch at gate B22. He wears it every day. It's a simple silver watch, nothing fancy, the kind you buy at a department store. But it keeps perfect time. This is the man a flight attendant told to calm down. This is the man whose bag she kicked without a second thought. And this is the moment Marcus Ellington, who had spent 43 years being exactly as excellent as his mother told him he needed to be, decided that enough was enough. Destiny Brooks almost didn't press record. She almost just watched the way most people watch, quietly, uncomfortably, convincing themselves it's not their place. But something made her thumb move, and that small decision changed everything. Gate B, 22, 6:53 a.m. Destiny Brooks was 22 years old, a senior at Clark Atlanta University, home for the week before fall semester finals. She had an early flight because her grandmother's birthday was Thursday and she refused to miss it. She was sitting 2 rows back from Marcus Ellington, wearing noise-canceling headphones that she hadn't actually turned on yet, scrolling through her phone in the way people scroll when they're tired but too wired to close their eyes. She saw it happen. The kick, the skid, the spin of the case across the floor. She pulled one earbud out. She watched Marcus stand up. She watched Karen Whitfield's face. She heard the words, "It was in the way," and felt something settle in her chest with the heaviness of recognition. She had heard variations of that particular tone her entire life. Her thumb moved to the camera app. She wasn't sure why. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that generations of people had acted on before cameras were in everyone's pocket. Except back then the only record was memory, and memory, they'd learned, was never enough. She was 45 seconds in when Marcus stood up. She caught it all. Marcus's calm, direct words. Karen's flat, dismissive response. To tell him to calm down. The gathering attention of the other passengers. The moment Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and removed a business card, which he placed on the seat beside him with the quiet precision of a man who has already decided exactly how this situation is going to be resolved. "I'd like to speak to a supervisor," Marcus said. "Now, please." Karen's expression shifted. Still not apologetic, but something else had entered it. A slight recalibration. A dawning awareness that this was not going in a direction she'd anticipated. Sir, boarding is about to begin, and I really need you to. I understand boarding is about to begin, Marcus said. I am a first-class ticketed passenger on this flight. I have no intention of missing it. What I am asking for is very simple. I would like to speak to your supervisor before we board. That is a reasonable request. I'll wait. He sat back down. He picked up his phone. He resumed what he'd been doing as if the conversation was complete, because for him he had stated his need. He would wait for it to be met. He was not going to escalate, perform, or beg. He had made his request in the same tone he used to open board meetings. Karen stared at him for 3 more seconds. Then she walked back through the gate door. Destiny lowered her phone but kept it going. The recording ran for 6 minutes and 40 seconds in total. When she landed in Birmingham 3 hours later, she would watch it back on her phone, and she would feel with great certainty that it needed to be seen. She posted it at 10:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 2 p.m. it had 80,000 views. By 7 p.m. it was past 1.1 million. By Wednesday morning, 12 hours after she'd posted it, it had been viewed 14 million times across 5 platforms, shared by journalists, activists, executives, and everyday people who recognized in it something they'd seen, felt, or experienced themselves. The clip extracted itself from her original post and lived separately. People stitched it, reacted to it, narrated it, analyzed it frame by frame. A retired civil rights attorney in Philadelphia watched it 7 times and shared it with a single sentence. This is why we still fight. A black woman in Seattle who was also a CEO watched it and called her assistant afterward. Get me on a different airline, she said. She didn't elaborate. A middle-aged white man in Ohio watched it with his teenage son. When it was over, his son asked, "Did she not know who he was?" The father thought for a long moment before answering. "That's exactly the right question," he said, "and also exactly the wrong question to have to ask." Destiny didn't expect any of this. She was in her grandmother's kitchen eating birthday cake when her phone started melting. She had 200 followers before that morning. By Thursday, she had 340,000. She gave one interview to a black-owned digital outlet. She said only this: "I recorded it because I know what it looks like when someone is being made to feel like they don't belong somewhere they have every right to be. I felt it. He wasn't going to be invisible on my watch." 3 minutes. That is how long it took from the moment Karen Whitfield walked through that gate door to the moment everything changed. 3 minutes that felt, to the people watching, like watching a very long fuse finally reach the powder. Gate B, 22, 6:56 a.m. His name was Raymond Torres, and he had been a gate supervisor for Skyline Airways for 9 years. He was 38, stocky, dark-haired, and had the particular manner of someone who has mediated 1,000 small crises and can usually tell within the first 15 seconds which kind of situation he's walking into. He walked through the gate door with Karen Whitfield 2 steps behind him. He scanned the waiting area. His eyes found Marcus Ellington, who was sitting with his phone in his hand and his recovered Rimowa case standing upright beside him once again. Raymond also noticed, as he walked closer, the several other passengers who had quietly stopped looking at their own phones and were watching. "Sir," Raymond said, extending a hand. "I'm Raymond Torres, gate supervisor. I understand there's been an issue. I'd like to hear about it." Marcus shook his hand. He gestured to the seat across from him, and Raymond sat down. Karen stood slightly to the side, arms crossed. Marcus explained what had happened. He did not embellish. He did not dramatize. He described the kick, the response, the instruction to calm down, the dismissal, all in the same clear, unhurried voice he had used throughout. He mentioned that there had been no physical harm, that his bag appeared undamaged, and that he had no interest in missing his flight. What he wanted, he said, was an acknowledgement that what had happened was not appropriate, and an assurance that it would be addressed. Raymond listened without interrupting. He nodded once or twice. When Marcus finished, he turned to Karen. "Is that accurate?" he asked. A pause. Karen shifted her weight. The bag was in the aisle, she said. It was beside my seat, Marcus said. There was a child. There was no child, said the elderly woman with the blueberry muffin from 3 seats away, who nobody had expected to speak. She had the crisp diction of a retired schoolteacher, which is exactly what she was. I've been sitting here the entire time. There was no child. The bag was next to his seat. She walked over and kicked it. The gate area was very quiet now. Raymond looked at Karen. Something in his expression had shifted. He had been in this job long enough to know when a story wasn't holding together. Karen, he said, and his voice was lower now, more carefully calibrated. Can I speak to you for a moment? They stepped to the side. They were far enough away to speak privately but close enough that the posture of the conversation was visible. It was not a friendly conversation. Raymond's hands were clasped in front of him. Karen's arms uncrossed. Her chin came down slightly. The architecture of the exchange lasted approximately 90 seconds. When Raymond walked back to Marcus, Karen did not follow. Mr. Ellington, Raymond said, and this is the part of the video that would be screenshotted and shared more than any other, the part that would become the caption in 1,000 posts. I want to sincerely apologize for what happened. It was completely unacceptable. I've removed Ms. Whitfield from this flight and from her duties for the remainder of the day pending a review with HR. We will be in contact with you directly, and I want to assure you personally that this is not the standard we hold ourselves to. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. I appreciate that, he said. Thank you. He picked up his phone. He looked at the business card he'd placed on the seat beside him. He picked that up too, and tucked it back into his blazer pocket. Boarding for Flight 1184 to Chicago began 4 minutes later. Marcus Ellington walked down the jet bridge in Seat 2A, as planned. His merger was 3 days from closing. His mother's watch kept perfect time. Behind him, the gate area settled back into Tuesday morning quiet. The elderly woman finished her muffin. Destiny Brooks exhaled and lowered her phone. Karen Whitfield was gone up by the time Flight 1184 reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. The communications team at Skyline Airways corporate headquarters in Dallas was already in emergency mode. They just didn't know it yet. Skyline Airways HQ, Dallas, 9:30 a.m. The first person to flag the video internally was a 26-year-old social media analyst named Brianna Okafor, who had been monitoring brand mentions since 8 a.m. as part of her standard morning routine. She had a dashboard, 6 open tabs, and a large iced coffee. At 9:22 a.m., she saw the notification. She watched the video once, then again. Then she picked up her phone and called her supervisor. We have a problem, she said, and it's moving fast. By 10:30 a.m., Skyline's Director of Communications, VP of Customer Experience, and Chief People Officer were in a conference room together. By 11 a.m., the video had cleared 500,000 views. By noon, it was being covered by 3 major national outlets, 2 of which had already reached out to the airline for comment. The internal conversation, by all accounts from those familiar with the situation, was not pleasant. There were voices in the room who wanted to start with the language of investigation. We're looking into the matter. The bureaucratic cushion that corporations reach for when they want to create distance from accountability. There were others who recognized, with some urgency, that the video was clear. That the video showed what it showed. That the person whose bag had been kicked was a Fortune profile CEO with a name, a face, and a company with a public profile. And that the longer they waited to say something real, the worse it was going to get. At 1:47 p.m. on Tuesday, Skyline Airways posted a statement on all of its official channels. It was 4 paragraphs long. The key section read, "What occurred at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport this morning was a clear violation of our values and our commitment to treating every passenger with dignity and respect. We have reviewed the situation and taken immediate action. We have also reached out directly to Mr. Ellington to offer our sincere apology." The statement confirmed that the employee in question was no longer on duty and that a formal review was underway. The internet did not find this sufficient. By Tuesday evening, #Skyline Airways was trending in 5 states and the airline's app had received an overnight wave of 1-star reviews. many of which referenced the video specifically. Celebrities with major platforms had weighed in. A retired NFL star, a Grammy-winning artist, a popular morning show host who told her audience she was switching carriers effective immediately. A coalition of black business organizations issued a statement calling for Skyline to take demonstrable and transparent corrective action. By Wednesday morning, Skyline had gone further. In a second, longer statement, the company confirmed that the employee had been terminated. They announced the creation of an internal task force to review customer service practices and bias training. They offered to establish a $500,000 scholarship fund in partnership with an HBCU of Marcus Ellington's choosing. And they confirmed that their CEO had personally called Marcus to apologize. Skyline's CEO, David Hargrove, made a brief appearance on a business cable channel Wednesday afternoon. He was careful, measured, clearly advised within an inch of his life. But he said one thing that cut through the scripted language and seemed to come from somewhere more genuine. "We failed a customer," he said. "More than that, we failed a person. And the conversation that needs to happen now, inside our walls, is not just about one employee. It's about the culture that made an employee think that kind of behavior was acceptable." It was the most honest thing a major airline CEO had said on camera in years. It was also, notably, the thing that calmed the storm, not entirely, not permanently, but enough. The scholarship fund was established within 30 days. Marcus Ellington designated it for first-generation black engineering students. The first cohort of recipients was announced 6 months later. 12 students. Full tuition. Every single one of them, when asked what they wanted to build, had an answer that was specific and passionate and completely unafraid. Dorothy Ellington would have approved. This is the part of the story that most people skip over because it's more complicated than the viral arc. But it's the part that matters most for understanding what actually happened and what we're supposed to take from it. Karen Whitfield, the aftermath. Karen Whitfield was fired. That's the headline. That's the fact that spread across screens and became the satisfying resolution to the narrative. She kicked the bag. She lost her job. Justice, neat and immediate. But here is what's worth sitting with. Karen Whitfield was 51 years old. She had been with Skyline Airways for 11 years. She had a daughter in college, a mortgage in suburban Atlanta, and, by all accounts, no record of formal disciplinary action in her employee file, which suggests uncharitably that whatever was in her had never been challenged in a way that left a paper trail. She did not give any public statement. She did not hire a lawyer who spoke to the press. She did not, as some predicted and others perhaps hoped, become a counter-narrative. She went quiet. She became, as people do when the internet has finished with them, a person living with the consequences of one recorded morning. None of this changes what she did. Her action was contemptuous and her response was dismissive in a way that carried unmistakable subtext. The instruction to calm down, delivered to a man who was being perfectly calm, was not an accident of tone. It was a reflex, and reflexes come from somewhere. But what the full story demands, what intellectual honesty demands, is that we ask the harder question. What do we do with the Karens of the world? Not as symbols, not as viral villains, but as actual human beings who carry within them the accumulated biases of a culture that spent centuries telling people it was acceptable to treat black men as furniture to be moved, as problems to be managed, as people who needed to calm down rather than be heard? The question is not whether Karen Whitfield was wrong. She was wrong. The question is whether firing her swiftly, publicly, definitively, did anything to change the culture that produced her reflex. And the honest answer is, some, but not enough. Consequence without reflection is not transformation. It's just removal. What makes Marcus Ellington's response to all of this remarkable is that he seemed to understand this implicitly. In the weeks that followed, he did not call for Karen's public humiliation. He did not perform outrage for the cameras. He gave one major interview to a national publication, in which he said something that surprised a lot of people who expected, perhaps, something sharper. "I don't want her to suffer," he said. "I want her to understand. Those aren't the same thing. What I want, what I've always wanted, is to move through the world without having to prove, every day, that I belong in it. That's not a big ask. It shouldn't be a big ask. But it still is." He paused, And then he said the thing that ended up being the most quoted line of the entire episode. The problem isn't one flight attendant. The problem is the world that trained her not to see me. 11 words. 43 years in the making. Karen Whitfield, wherever she is now, presumably knows those words exist. What she has done with them is between her and whatever quiet Tuesday mornings her life holds now. The rest of us are left to decide what we'll do with them. Because the truth is that the gate at Hartsfield-Jackson is everywhere. It's in offices and restaurants and conference rooms and school hallways and doctors' waiting rooms and city streets at midnight. And the question it asks us every time is the same. Are you going to see the person in front of you? Or are you going to kick their bag and walk away? He didn't want to give a speech. He said that later, that his instinct was to close the door on the whole thing, finish the merger, go back to building his company. But the requests kept coming. And finally, one of them was impossible to say no to. TED Stage, New York City, 8 weeks later. The invitation came from the curator of a major business conference in New York. Not TED itself, but an event of comparable weight, the kind attended by the people who write the checks and set the policies and shape the direction of industries. The organizer's email was direct. You don't have to make it about the airport, but I think you have something to say. And I think this room needs to hear it. Marcus agreed to 18 minutes. He wrote the talk himself, alone, over 3 evenings in his home office in Atlanta with the framed note from his mother visible on the wall across from his desk. He did not use slides. He did not use a teleprompter. He brought the business card he had placed on the seat at gate B22, still in the inside pocket of the same charcoal blazer, and set it on the podium when he walked out, and then never mentioned it and never touched it again. He started with a question. How many of you, he said, scanning the room full of executives and investors and founders and decision-makers, have ever walked into a room and immediately understood, not thought, not feared, but understood, that someone there did not expect you to be as capable as you are? A pause. How many of you have had to be twice as good to be considered half as ready? How many of you have had your ideas credited to someone else? How many of you have been told to calm down when you were already calm? The room was very still. I have built a company worth $340 million, he said. I have negotiated deals in 40 countries. I have sat at every kind of table you can imagine. And I still get on a plane carrying the quiet understanding that someone, somewhere in that airport, is going to make me feel like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. He didn't tell the story of the airport the way the internet had told it. He didn't linger on Karen Whitfield, didn't dramatize the kick, didn't frame it as a victory. He used it as a door, and he walked through that door into something much larger. A conversation about what it costs, in actual human energy, in psychological bandwidth, in creative output, when an entire category of people has to spend part of every day managing the way other people see them. We talk about diversity in the workplace, he said, but we almost never talk about the tax. The invisible cost that people from underrepresented backgrounds pay every single day just to show up and be taken seriously. The energy spent on code switching, on anticipating discomfort, on deciding whether to call something out or let it go because you've done the math and you know what calling it out will cost you. He spoke for 17 minutes and 40 seconds. When he finished, the room stood. Not in the automatic, reflexive way that rooms sometimes stand for famous people. In the unsteady, slightly reluctant way that people stand when something has shifted in them and they're not entirely sure what to do with the shift. The talk was filmed. It was posted. It reached 22 million views in 2 weeks. Business schools added it to their curricula. HR departments began using it in onboarding sessions. A senator from Georgia entered it into the congressional record. More importantly, hundreds of thousands of people wrote, in comments and emails and handwritten letters, some variation of the same thing. I felt exactly what you described, and I never had the words for it until now. Marcus Ellington had spent 20 years building a company. He spent 18 minutes building something even harder to construct. A moment of genuine, shared recognition. The kind that crosses the barriers of experience and background and forces a room, forces a country, to at least consider the possibility that there is a cost being paid every day by people who deserve not to pay it. He flew home coach. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. He sat by the window, watched Georgia emerge below the clouds, and put on his mother's watch. Every story like this one eventually arrives at the same place. The morning after the video stops trending, when the corporation has issued its statement and the fired employee has disappeared from the news cycle and the world has moved on to the next thing. What's left? What actually changed? And what are we supposed to do with it? Epilogue: the meaning that matters. Here is what did not change. Marcus Ellington still has to navigate the world in the body he lives in. He still walks into rooms where someone's first impression of him is shaped by something other than his resume. He still occasionally gets the look, that barely there recalibration in someone's expression when they realize the room's most powerful person is him. He still wears his mother's watch, and some mornings the weight of it is history, and some mornings it is simply a watch. Here is what did change. 12 young black engineering students are in school today on full scholarships because a flight attendant kicked a bag. Skyline Airways updated its bias training program, imperfectly, incompletely, but updated it. Hundreds of companies across the country used the moment as a prompt for internal conversations that had been overdue. Destiny Brooks, who hit record on Instinct, graduated and now works in documentary journalism. She credits a Tuesday morning at Gate B22 for clarifying, beyond any doubt, what she wanted to do with her life. And millions of people, black people in particular, watched a video of a man handle an act of contempt with such complete, unshakable dignity that it became a kind of testimony. A reminder of something that needed to be witnessed and remembered and passed along. But here is the thing about this story that gets lost in the retelling, the thing that matters more than the firing and the viral video and the corporate statement and the 18-minute talk. Marcus Ellington should not have had to handle it with dignity. He should not have had to be twice as composed as the situation required. He should not have been put in a position where his worth as a person was suddenly dependent on his ability to stay calm, while someone made it clear they did not see him as a full human being. He was excellent, yes. He was measured and powerful and right. But the bar that his excellence had to clear, simply to be seen, simply to be treated as a person who deserves a basic apology, that bar should not exist. The most important question this story raises is not what happened to Karen Whitfield. It is not how did Marcus respond. It is not even what will Skyline Airways do differently. The most important question is, why in 2024 does a black man still have to build a $340 million company and carry it with him into airports just to have a reasonable expectation of being treated with basic human dignity? Why does the dignity have to be earned? Why isn't it assumed? These are not rhetorical questions. They are not questions with easy answers. They are questions that this country has been avoiding, deflecting, deferring for generations. Questions that video after video, incident after incident, story after story keeps forcing back to the surface because they have not been answered. Because the systems and the reflexes and the invisible hierarchies that produced Karen Whitfield's kick are still very much in place, modified slightly by awareness, mostly unchanged in their structural architecture. What changes them is not one firing. What changes them is not one viral moment, however powerful. What changes them is what happened, quietly and less cinematically, in the weeks after. A 12-year-old in Atlanta watched the video with her parents and asked why it happened. Her father, who had his own version of that story, tried to explain. The conversation lasted 2 hours. The daughter went to school the next day and wrote an essay about it. Her teacher, moved by what she read, used it as the starting point for a class discussion that lasted a week. That's what changes things. Slowly, imperfectly, one conversation at a time. Marcus Ellington, for his part, went back to work. The merger closed on schedule. Ellington Technologies announced 300 new hires in the fourth quarter, 40% of whom were from underrepresented backgrounds. He gave another speech, smaller, no cameras, at a high school career day in Decatur, and didn't mention the airport once. He talked about his mother. He talked about $11,000 in savings and a second-hand MacBook and 41 investors who said no. He talked about the note on his office wall and what it meant to build something so good that the room has no choice but to sit down and listen. One kid in the back row, a lanky 15-year-old in a hoodie who had been seemingly on his phone the entire time, looked up when Marcus said that last line. He put his phone face down on the desk. He picked up his pencil. He started writing. That's the story. Not the kick. Not the firing. Not the 14 million views. The kid in the back row, picking up his pencil, deciding that something is worth writing down. Build something so good they have to respect it. Dorothy Ellington said it first. Her son proved it possible. Now it belongs to the rest of us.